Here's the problem that most parents run into. They'll take their kid to Sunday school, they'll bring the little illustrated Bible or whatever, and they'll transmit their religious values to their kids. No question, no problem, they all do it. Yet when it comes to political truths and economic truths, these same parents struggle to articulate to their children what they believe. And what we've found over time is that the key problem is that the parents themselves feel like they only have a very superficial understanding of those political and economic ideas. Therefore, they feel ill-equipped to be the ones to talk to their kids. Therefore, they don't. Meanwhile, their kids are getting exposed on TikTok or by teachers and textbooks and so forth to very contrary ideas. So the whole thesis behind what our organization does is to say we need to empower those parents with resources so that they can have conversations with their kids in the home about the ideas they already believe in, at least conceptually, but we're trying to just be a resource to say, let's bring the parents and the kids together, read together, have amazing conversations, and then learn together.
We the people, why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.
Connor Boyack is a best-selling author of several dozen books, founder of a think tank that has changed over 100 laws, frequent public speaker, and outlaw beekeeper. Connor is best known as author of the acclaimed Tuttle Twins book series, which has sold over 6 million copies. The Tuttle Twins books teach kids and their parents the ideas of a free society. He is also executive producer of the Tuttle Twins animated cartoon series. A self-made entrepreneur, Connor is founder and president of Libertas Network, an association of family-facing initiatives that change hearts, minds, and laws to create a freer future. With his team, he has changed over 100 laws, helped tens of thousands of kids become entrepreneurs, educated millions, and empowered families all over the world to learn about and defend the ideas of free society. But today, he's going to join We the People, and we're going to talk about all of this. Connor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Gates.
So we're going to talk about Tuttle Twins, we're going to talk about Libertas, but I want to sort of frame it in this broader conversation, sort of what your mission is with all of this. And I see that as saving children, raising patriots. But there's two sort of groups that require that. There's the children that we're trying to save before it's too late, and there's the parents. And parents are often begging for resources in this war for the minds of children. And what I love about what you're doing is, by the time they turn 18 and go away to college, our work is pretty much done at that point. The left, who we're up against, has been very good at capturing them at that level, but also before that, through education and all the other models. And so many on the right wait too long to try to win back these minds. You're starting that fight earlier. Talk about that.
Historically, the conservative movement has allowed their ideological adversaries to educate their own children during their most intellectually formative years. And only later, as you point out, in college or adulthood, has the conservative movement then done its outreach with its campus groups at college or its think tanks that communicate with adults and voters. And I just think that's been a critical error. I think that's been a massive oversight. And if we want to save our children, if we want to keep them from being brainwashed and keep them engaged in these ideas of freedom, then we as parents have to communicate them to our children. Here's the problem that most parents run into. Take your average Christian conservative family. They'll take their kid to Sunday school, they'll bring the little illustrated Bible or whatever, and they'll transmit their religious values to their kids. No question, no problem. They all do it. Yet when it comes to political truths and economic truths, right, these same parents struggle to articulate to their children what they believe. And what we've found over time is that the key problem is that the parents themselves feel like they only have a very superficial understanding of those political and economic ideas. Therefore, they feel ill-equipped to be the ones to talk to their kids. Therefore, they don't. Meanwhile, their kids are getting exposed on TikTok or by teachers and textbooks and so forth to very contrary ideas. So the whole thesis behind what our organization does, in particular with the Tuttle Twins, is to say we need to empower those parents with resources so that they can have conversations with their kids in the home about the ideas the parents already really kind of believe in, at least conceptually, right? Most of these parents don't really understand the nuances and the detail and the history that's where our books can come in. But we're trying to just be a resource to say, let's bring the parents and the kids together, read together, have amazing conversations, and then learn together.
And what I love about what you do with Tuttle Twins and Libertas, and my next question is going to be sort of for you to kind of enlighten us on what those are and how they work together, is it's engaging also for the parents. Angel Studios just picked up, or in the past picked up your books and turned them into a television series. And when I watch it with my kids, I'm engaged. There's actually adult comedy, appropriate adult comedy in there. But it's
that word is tough. When we say adult now, you mean something entirely
exactly
different, right?
Yeah. It's
intellectual.
It's appropriate because as a parent, I know what I believe. But it's still a struggle to find ways to appropriately translate those beliefs to my children. They need to be told not from a 40-year-old's point of view, but from a child's point of view. And that's what your work does. So it's appropriate and engaging for children, but also gives the adults the resources to be able to communicate those stories and values to their children. So Tuttle Twins fits into this sort of larger Libertas network. Tell me about both of those.
So the Tuttle Twins was born of a dad, myself, just wanting to share with my kids what I believe, as we were just saying moments ago. And in 2013, I went on Amazon. I was like, books that teach about free markets for kids, or children's books about property rights. There was nothing. I was talking with my buddy Elijah at the time, who's now our illustrator, my partner in the Tuttle Twins. He had kids of a similar age. And he's like, what if we did a kid's book? You know, we could just do one for fun. There was no grand vision of what it's become. It very much was just in response to two dads wanting to do this for their kids. A lot of other families wanted it for their own kids, and that just snowballed from there over the years. So the Tuttle Twins now, as you said in the intro, has sold millions of copies. It's a cartoon. It's blown up. To me, that shows that there was a void in the marketplace, that clearly there's a lot of parents who feel like they need or want help to teach their kids about these ideas. And so that's the niche that Tuttle Twins is able to fill. It's part of a broader network of organizations, the Libertas Network, which is kind of like a big umbrella nonprofit under which we have a bunch of different projects, all of them designed to empower families with the ideas of freedom and then get them engaged. So Tuttle Twins is one. We have a youth entrepreneurship project called the Children's Entrepreneur Market. We just acquired a company called Praxis, which helps young adults get a job without needing a college degree. And so we're building this constellation of projects that all help families, no matter the age of their children, say, here are these empowering ideas that can make your life better, that can build a better world. Let's figure out the right way that you want to interface with those ideas. So that's what Libertas Network is all about. We think that our theory of change, if you will, is that if we want to save our country, you said it a little bit in the intro, if we want to save our country, we got to save our kids. And I don't think we save our country at the Capitol or in the courtroom. I think we save it at the family dinner table. And we have to bring families together to talk about these ideas, learn about these ideas, but then figure out, how do we actually engage in these ideas? How do we be part of the solution rather than feeling disempowered at home because I'm just one person? There's so much more opportunity than that. So we want to help parents figure out what is that opportunity.
Yeah, it's similar to why I started this show. I didn't see this show in the marketplace. I saw a lot of sort of media outlets talking down to me, and it may have sprinkled in my values, but certainly not in the manner that I talk about them. So I wanted to take sort of my back porch conversations with my buddies and turn them into a show where we sound, we look, we feel like everyday Americans, we the people having these conversations. And you know, a lot of great things like Tuttle Twins are started that way. You want something in your life that doesn't exist.
Right.
You can't find it, you create it.
That's
and
right.
It turns into something special like you've done. So a fun question. If you could take one Tuttle Twins book, and there are many, and hand it to every member of Congress for required reading, which one would it be and why?
Oh boy, that's like asking a parent to pick their favorite kid, right? I'll do my best. I know the answer. The one I think that I would pick is, it was our third book, called The Tuttle Twins and the Creature from Jekyll Island. All of our children's books, so we have books for toddlers, we have books for teens, but we have a children's series. And the format of that particular series is that every book is based on like a classic, well-known text. So we have like The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek. We've got Atlas Shrugged. We've got The Law by Frederick Bastiat. We've got Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. We have all these books, and we basically turn them into kids' versions. The Creature from Jekyll Island was written decades ago by G. Edward Griffin, all about the Federal Reserve. So to your question, why would I pick that book? I think that the Federal Reserve is like the core evil in our society. All of the misdeeds that politicians are doing, all the wars, all the crazy deficit spending and welfare and everything is traced back to the fact that they can just print the money and they can debase our money. And I think even talking about the family, few people think about like inflation in the context of families. If I know that I'm not going to be able to save my money well for the future, I'm incentivized to spend it now before it loses purchasing power. And that inhibits intergenerational wealth, right? And it inhibits me investing in my kids, because if I hang on to this hard-earned money, it's just going to get less in value over time. And so I think of the Fed not only as just a political problem, but it's a family one if we are effectively stealing from families. So I think understanding what is money, how does this system work, and then if you understand the system, you can try and maybe navigate around it, or hedge your, move your wealth elsewhere, buy Bitcoin or gold or whatever you want to do. But to me, that is the one book for politicians to read. Is like, you got to understand the corrosive nature of the Federal Reserve and how it reaches its tentacles in throughout all of society. Plus, it's just a fun story. There's this evil creature going around changing prices, so kids kind of like it. That it's a little bit like edgy or whatever. And anyways, that's the one that I would pick.
What's the age range for
that series?
Age level for that series?
Yeah, for that series, it's like, well, it's funny you asked this, and as a follow-up to your question, because when people ask me what age are the children's books for, I usually say, well, it's like for ages 6 to 12 and members of Congress, because it's full of pictures.
You took the word, you took the joke right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Damn it!
No, I use that one all the time, so it was great that you asked.
Maybe they're on that reading level. So you're very knowledgeable about the school systems across the states in the United States. You've done research there. You're trying to re-educate kids or educate them in a different format. You homeschool your own kids, so you've looked at all these things. What is the biggest lie you think being taught to our kids in school? In Florida, we've rolled back, we have a very courageous State Board of Education. We've rolled back a lot of the CRT nonsense that was being taught to our kids. But as you look out nationally, or maybe take one state as an example, what do you think the biggest lie is that our kids are being taught? And then how do we counter it? Because we can't always, depending on what the school board in that state looks like or the legislation in that state, we can't always change it in the classroom, but we can certainly counter it in our homes.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
Big question. Let me answer it with a story. So recently this group got together, spent a year and a half reviewing curricula, classroom assignments, tests, projects, talking to students, talking to teachers, trying to assess how is education in America going? How are we doing? They spent a year and a half doing this. And then just recently they released this report called A Nation at Risk, in which they said that America's educational foundations are being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity. They further said that if a foreign government had attempted to impose upon America the very mediocre educational performance that now exists, we might have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we've allowed this to happen to ourselves. Now, I told a little fib. I said this happened recently. It didn't. This happened in 1983. The Reagan administration published this report. In fact, depending on the time when this podcast is published, it'll be the anniversary, April 26, 1983. Wow. And so I asked folks 40 plus years ago if they were saying that our education system was mediocre. Anyone think that it's substantially improved or at all improved since then? Of course, we know the answer. Like, it's just this constant dumbing down and degradation. So to your question, Gates, when I think of what is the biggest lie, I think the lie is the system itself. Like, look, if parents have to send their kids to a government school, or if they, for whatever reason, choose, like, I'm not one to say, pull your kids out, bar none, whatever. Like, you pick. What are your choices? You do what's right for your family. It's fine. But at least be eyes wide open about the fact that how our school system is set up is not conducive to producing curious, enlightened, critical thinking, entrepreneurial, independent-minded kids. If you as a parent want that for your child, you have to supplement elsewhere. You have to provide your children a counter agent to the intellectual viruses that they're picking up while they're in the school environment. So I think the biggest lie is that this system is going to prepare our kids for, especially a changing world with AI and automation and technology. Schools are set up for the industrial era, preparing kids for an economy that no longer exists. And it's very hard for the system to adapt and adjust. You know how government systems work. They're always behind the entrepreneurs and the innovators. So I feel like the lie is that parents think, oh, I went to school and I turned out fine decades ago, when the world is different and the world is quickly changing. And if we want our kids to be prepared for this changing world, I think we need to do something different. Now, look, a parent whose kid is in a government school, but they're very intentional in the home about teaching core values and critical thinking and adaptability and resilience, all that stuff, that kid will turn out fine. It has always mattered what's happening in the home, despite what your schooling option is. But I think the time is such that parents have to be that much more intentional. They have to be that much more involved in their kid's life, because the school system just, frankly, it's not cutting it. It's producing a generation of kids who are apathetic, historically ignorant, disengaged, and I worry about the future of our country if those are the future voters. So my efforts to reach out to families and to kids is to say, I want to counteract that. We need a generation of bright, curious, entrepreneurial, intellectually engaged people, and it's not happening from the system, so we have to take up the torch ourselves and do it.
Yeah, I mean, over the last 30, 40 years, it seems like the more money we put into education and the DOE, and they're talking about, disbanding that and dismantling it, I should say, it seems like the more money we put in, the worse results we get. We're raising sort of regurgitators, not thinkers. You use the word curiosity, you use the word entrepreneurial. Those are the skill sets, the values, and what we need to put into kids to actually produce the outputs, rather than give them the outputs up front, especially when the outputs in some situations are corrupt. But we need to raise thinkers. And that's what you're doing. So oftentimes you meet an operator of a business or a nonprofit who isn't necessarily a practitioner, meaning, and for better or worse, there's not always a bad reason for that. It's not appropriate for the lifestyle that they live. Maybe they're not a parent with kids in the home, but they make a good product that people can use. But you're different. You're operating Libertas and Tuttle Twins, and you're using it in your home because you are a parent. So I always like asking people in these situations, how do you use your resources in your home?
My kids have always been the guinea pigs, right? And when they were younger, they liked that.
That's called R&D.
It is free R&D at that, yeah. And they've always enjoyed that fact. Now I've broadened it out. We have a broader group of kids and families that I trust, and we'll share early drafts of books we're working on and stuff like that. And look, my kids are now, 10 years older than when we started back in 2014. And if I'm producing kids' books that are underneath them in age format, I've got to look elsewhere. It's a little beneath my kids or whatever. But I always keep in mind when I'm writing books that first raw need that I had. It was, I'm a dad who wants his kids to learn these powerful values. I don't quite know how to simplify them and explain them to a kid myself. I need a resource, a fun storybook. And that's the frame of mind I always try and put myself in. But now with, beyond the books, we've got teen books, we've got a Tuttle Twins Academy for teens, we've got a monthly magazine, we have all kinds of other stuff. And like any family, my kids gravitate to some of the things over others, right? So maybe they'll read the magazine, maybe they'll not. They're heavy in the cartoon. They always want to watch the latest, cartoon episode or the teen books and so forth. What we're trying to build, recognizing that some kids are more interested maybe in the entrepreneurship side. Some kids are more curious about history, right? Whatever your interests or your learning styles are, what we're trying to build is something for everyone, recognizing that families have kids with very diverse interests and needs. I think that's one of the crimes of the school system. It's very much largely a one-size-fits-all. Everyone is expected to follow the same standard, and I fundamentally don't operate that way. Our homeschooling looks more like unschooling / a la carte, a class here, a book there, or whatever there, because our children are unique. And I want my son and my daughter to have a very customized curriculum that supports their interests and their curiosities. So with Tuttle Twins, we're trying to build enough that you can kind of pick and choose your own adventure and figure out, oh, my kids want this, or they'll gravitate better to that.
On the right, we're criticized by the left as being radical for wanting to take back some of the control of what goes into our children's brains, not just passing it off to bureaucrats and government to handle for us, the quote experts. What do you think in your experience, whether it's within the Tuttle Twins umbrella or just in your parenting experience, is the most unconventional or radical thing you've done when it comes to your children in the home?
Ooh, provocative question. Let me actually start with a story that relates to the first part of what you said. CNN a few years ago came after us wrote this whole article about
that means you're doing something right.
Exactly. You're catching flack if you're over the target, right? And the article was about how we were creating a right-wing children's education complex, which I laughed. It was, and I'm a marketer. My background's in online marketing. So when I got the little Google alert, like, oh, here's this, I was like, thank you. This is a gift. We took a screenshot of the article. We sent it out to our email list. At the time, we had like 500,000 people on the list or so. And we said, coupon code CNN will get you half off the books this weekend. We sold 100,000 books because of CNN.
That's beautiful.
To which I always say, if anyone has any contacts at MSNBC, please send them our way, because it's good. It's good for business. The biggest thing that I've tried to instill in my kids and teach in my kids through the Tuttle Twins, and the reason why I thought your question was provocative, because I think the answer is provocative, and that is that adults are making it up as they go along. As you say, the experts are telling us that you can't teach your kids that, or that's wrong. The experts, we saw this with COVID especially, like the people who you think are experts typically are not. Do they know a bunch of factoids? Could they win Jeopardy? Right? Maybe. But so many of us adults are just stringing things together one day at a time. When I speak especially to teen groups, I say I felt very intimidated as a teenager. I felt that there was this like threshold above which I would have to somehow climb, where I need to know all the things and I need to know how to do all this stuff. And that's just not true. You know, most adults have like an 8th grade level education and understanding in a lot of different issues. And so to me, that's an empowering message to tell kids, look, if you acquire a certain set of soft skills, if you figure out how to think and how to critically analyze and how to adapt and be resilient, if you kind of have this broad base of kind of social skills and mental models, you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to adapt yourself to any situation, especially in a fast-changing economy like we're in right now. That to me is the biggest lie, is that I'm the expert, I'm the teacher, you're the student. I'm going to transmit knowledge. Well, your teacher is probably wrong in a bunch of things. The truth is not what one person tells you. The truth is independent of someone's opinions or credentials or background. And so I try and empower my kids. Even like the challenge is, as a parent, right? I'm the authority, but I'm like, I'm probably wrong in a bunch of stuff. Don't believe everything I'm telling you. That to me is a very empowering message, but a very tough one for a parent to communicate, because we're inviting kids to challenge our own authority, respectfully, appropriately. But I think that produces a great outcome of a kid who understands that I need to figure out how to navigate the world and find the truth, but not just trust that politician or that news media talking head or that doctor. Right? I need to study it out for myself and use the tools that I have at my disposal to figure out what is the truth.
That's a perfect transition for what I want to talk about next. We've, up to this point, kind of been talking about what goes on in the home, sort of preparing our children to go out and face the world that waits for them, to go live in that world. Mm-hmm. And once they step into that world, regardless of how well we've prepared them for that, they face constraints. A lot of times, government constraints. Mm-hmm. You have an amazing story about shaping legislation, shaping laws for the world that our kids operate in. Because no matter how well we prepare them, if those handcuffs still exist when they step out of the home, they actually can't even sometimes apply the skill set that they've cultivated throughout their childhood. Tell us about the lemonade stand and the legislation that you moved around this issue.
So I'm sure most of your listeners have seen one of these stories over the years. They seem to bubble up every few years, where a little kid's lemonade stand gets shut down because they don't have a business license or a food handler's permit. The one that I always like to share was this 4-year-old Abigail in Colorado. She was selling 50-cent cups of lemonade. There was like a race going by their house, and so mom helped her set up, and she had these tiny little solo cups, 50 cents, and some bureaucrat from the county health department, because there were a bunch of like booths along the path, I guess people were setting up, and this bureaucrat walks by and talks to the mom and shuts down the lemonade stand. Sorry, you need a food handler's permit. Oh, by the way, that costs $80. You do the math on how many cups of lemonade Abigail would have to sell just to break even, let alone profit. It's insane. And so, this was like 2015 maybe. One of these stories happened, and I was just incensed. I thought this was so stupid, so anti-American in a way. And so we went to the legislature and we proposed. It took us 3 years to finally get it passed, because we were battling the cities and the counties who wanted to retain their authority to, shut down vendors and so forth. But in 2017, we finally got past the country's first, We call it a lemonade stand law, but it applies to any economic activity. You could be, technically, if you're a kid and you're walking dogs or you're mowing lawns or even you're babysitting, any economic activity, you're legally required to get a business license. Most kids don't. It's just not enforced. So our law says, hey, bureaucrats, hey, everyone else, leave kids alone, whatever their economic activity is, even though it's lemonade stand, it's everything. And let's just let these kids go out and build. Let's lower the barrier to entry, right? Like, let's wait until they're 18 for the crushing weight of the state to come upon them with all their permit fees and everything else. But in the meantime, let them just be kids and go have fun. And so that passed in 2017. We've helped about a dozen states pass laws like that around the country. It's one of those laws that, like you said in the intro, we've changed over 100 laws. A lot of them are very substantive and significant. This one feels a little more like silly and fun and minor in comparison. But it's one of the ones that gets the most attention out of our work because people are like, wait a minute, like my kid should have to pay a $80 permit just for the privilege of being able to sell some country time lemonade that we bought at the store. Like, how does that make any sense? So we got that law passed. Out of that grew our youth entrepreneurship project, trying to say, let's lean into this and really celebrate and support kids launching businesses. But like the Tuttle Twins, it's like, here's this little need or this opportunity, and let's respond to it just in the moment, not knowing what it would become. We had no idea that we'd be, helping 100,000 kids this year launch a small business in America, all because that one headline of a kid's lemonade stand getting shut down led us to take action and go change a law. It's kind of fun.
I can't imagine being the person that has to go or is willing to go shut down a lemonade stand.
How do you live with yourself?
Just turn down the other street and act like you didn't see it. I mean, the government will do anything to collect revenues from us. And what's sad is if they let those kids go learn how to operate a business, they'll probably collect more revenues later down the road, but there's no such thing as long-term gratification in the government. So
Exactly.
You mentioned youth entrepreneurs, and that's where I wanted to take this. Again, you're doing great work in the home. You see a legislative issue in the world, in society. You fix that. You don't stop there, Connor. You bring it back into the home or into your network to say, okay, we fixed legislation. How do we capitalize on that and now provide kids with the opportunity to learn how to be entrepreneurs, to prepare themselves to work in society down the road? Talk about that program. You mentioned you have 100,000 kids in this program. I know we talked offline. The average age is 9, but they're 5 to 17-year-old entrepreneurs starting businesses. You think you can scale it up to 500,000 kids. Walk us through youth entrepreneurs.
So as I think about freedom in this broad context, I wonder, how do we get kids curious about it? How do we get families engaged in it? How do we produce adults that are going to be ardent defenders of it? And my answer to those questions is that I think there's no greater defender of freedom than someone who owns something. When you have an ownership stake, when you've created something, you naturally want to defend it from those who are trying to, take a piece of it or shut it down. And so I think we need a culture of entrepreneurship. I think we need a culture of value creators and owners as opposed to just passive consumers, right? Do I think that every kid should be an entrepreneur? No. But I think that every kid needs to learn the entrepreneurial way of thinking, right? Which is it's problem solving and value creation. It's that, Gates, if I make your life a little bit better, then the rule of reciprocity is going to kick in and you're going to find way and we're going to work together. There's going to be that creates abundance. That creates wealth. Kids aren't trained to think that way in school. It's a very much zero-sum game, take what's mine. If I win, that means you have to lose. That's not the way the world works. So our project, it's called the Children's Entrepreneur Market. And it's designed to facilitate these exact type of experiences. How do we get kids to feel like owners and value creators? So think of our market like a farmer's market, but it's run entirely by the kids. So you can help your kids set up their booth, get them all set, but then you have to sit back and let your kids run the show for, typically it's 3 hours, selling real products for real money. You said in the intro, I'm an outlaw beekeeper. So I sell honey. We have a lot of honey. So my kids, when we started, they had jars of our honey and they'd have to pay me for it and they'd be able to upsell and charge more. And they loved it, right? Because they're earning, a bunch of money. It actually had a negative side to it. A few weeks after our first market, I offered my boy like $5 to go pull weeds or something out front. He's like, $5? I could make way more of that at one of those markets. So I priced myself out of the market. So we're launching these around the country. Typically, the way it works is we'll launch in a metro area, say San Diego or Dallas or Tampa, where we're at, and we'll hire someone local, and they'll plan a bunch of different events throughout the year, at least 8 to 10. So that if your kids come, they're like, Dad, that was amazing. Can we do it again? Then they're going to have another opportunity, which is great because not only do we want them making money, but what we're sneakily doing is using that profit motive as a way to teach kids. I mean, kids are learning about like budgets and spreadsheets. If you were to sit them down and say, time to learn Excel, kids, like boring, right? But if it's about, hey, let's figure out what our net profit is and track all our, prices and costs, suddenly they're learning spreadsheets. They're learning about marketing, customer service, money management. Literally, like the funny thing, I remember a few years ago when fidget spinners were all the craze. Now it's slime. The slime is the biggest product we have at our markets. But a few years ago it was fidget spinners, and we had sourced from like Alibaba or somewhere a bunch of fidget spinners for our kids, and they set up shop in our little canopy booth, and it was $5 for a fidget spinner. And then literally across the pathway, because all these canopies are all clustered together, right across the way, there were some kids selling fidget spinners for $4. And it was an amazing teaching opportunity with my kids. What can we do? Can we lower ours? What is our margin? Can we do that? Can we figure out something creative? 3 for the price of 2, or buy one, get one half off, or how do we make ours a little better? And those are the types of lessons that kids aren't really getting anywhere else. So we're trying to figure out how do we launch 1 million little business owners, and not all of them are going to go on and do business. Some of them are. We have amazing success stories of kids that are going on and doing wonderful things as entrepreneurs. But I see this as a seed planting mission. We want to instill those values and those core ideas of value creation, problem solving, critical thinking that are going to empower these kids in any number of ways that we can't track or foresee. But I get excited when I think about the future when we're focusing on these youth projects, because this is precisely what our movement has needed for decades and no one's been doing. I feel fortunate every day to work on this stuff because I think it has such long-term potential.
Entrepreneurship gets misconstrued. It's an intimidating word for a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people associate it with being a business owner, starting a business, and it is by the textbook definition. But entrepreneurship is you own yourself. Even if you work for a big bureaucratic organization, you are still your own business. You're your own person. There's entrepreneurship that is required to operate your life. I had Five for Fighting on here a few weeks ago, and John Ondrazik, their leads. Five for Fighting is not a band, which was a fun part of the episode. It's one man, John Ondrazik. He's a wonderful man. He was talking about songwriting. And I don't know that John would call himself an entrepreneur, but we went into this whole conversation about how songwriting is entrepreneurial. Every song is a startup. So it's a skill set that helps one own themselves in the world and navigate life. And it's transferable to so many things. So I applaud the work you're doing there,
Thank you.
even if the kids don't go start actual businesses. You've been very outspoken on a number of legislative issues, not just this one. I mean, as we said in the intro, you've helped facilitate the passing of over 100 laws. Is there something that you were afraid to dip your toe into, or what was one of the highest legislative hurdles that you've involved yourself in? So much so where you almost thought maybe the juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
That's an interesting question.
And what I'm getting at is, because we're going to have a conversation in a minute about how to empower listeners to sort of get active in their communities. And I think oftentimes people see things and they're like, well, that's too high a hill to climb. I don't have the skill set to do that. But I mean, you've got a plethora of examples of ways that you've gotten in the fight.
Well, I distinctly remember one issue. This was civil asset forfeiture. For those who don't know that term, what it means is a law that allows the government to take your property without convicting you of a crime. It arises from maritime law, where basically they would have a ship and they wouldn't know who the owner is, so they would legally take possession of the property. Nowadays, it looks like you're driving, to Vegas or whatever, and you got $1,000 in the passenger seat. A cop pulls you over for speeding and says, "What's that?" And you say, "Well, this is my money," and they take it without having to convict you of a crime. They take your money, take your car, take whatever. So this law around the country has been abused. There's been all kinds of national press. And so in Utah, we discovered that the Attorney General's office had deceived the legislature into changing the forfeiture law, making it easier for police and prosecutors to take people's property. And they did this by having kind of like an omnibus bill. It was like this really big bill, and it was late in the legislative session. And the prosecutors from the Attorney General's office told the sponsor of the bill, who was in leadership, hey, this bill doesn't change anything. It's just making some cosmetic changes, but we had to lump it all together. Taking them at their word, he went and told his colleagues that. The legislature unanimously passes this bill that substantively, like, really weakened property rights protections. We found out about it a few months later. We blew the whistle. We did this report. I find myself in a room with all these attorneys. And my background, and we didn't really get into it, my background, I was a web developer. I built websites for a living before I started Libertas, and I have no law degree. I have no economics background. Like, all the things that I'm best known for teaching and doing, I have no formal credentials in. I've just learned.
Guess what you are, Connor?
An entrepreneur.
An entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. and to me, it's a very empowering message. Like, if I can do it, I'm a washed up web developer. Anyone else can do it. But I'm in this room with all these attorneys, and I'm making all these legal arguments about why they're wrong and why we need to, maintain property rights protections and so forth. And it's like 15-1. I mean, they just have like and I'm just like this, like, whatever guy. And I had a couple allies there, one of whom was an attorney, but I'm the one leading this meeting. And so, thinking to your question about like intimidation and taking on issues that are tough, that can be big imposter syndrome flare up, right? Like, who am I to sit in a room like that? Who am I to do something like this? But I knew that I was right. I knew that I had truth on my side. I knew that what they did was wrong. And I knew that I had an army behind me. I knew, that I had the right position. And so that moral strength and conviction made it easy for me to sit in that room and hold my own. Could I parry, with every little legal argument that they did? No. Did I know every little case law that they? No. But I knew that I was right. I knew that we were going to win. We did. We got it rolled back. We got it fixed. We got the law strengthened for property rights, and off we went. But I reflect on that, realizing that that was kind of a canary in the coal mine for what happened throughout my career, or continues to happen with Libertas, is that I find myself in rooms advocating for things against people who are well-funded, well-educated, significant, relevant backgrounds in the issues that we're talking about. And I'm just a guy who cares, who asserted myself into having a seat at that table. But now I've got enough people behind me and resources behind me and allies, and I hire attorneys and economists and stuff, right, as needed to get the job done. But as I reflect on that, I realize, like, that's such a winning message for people to realize that anyone can do this. You don't have to have any type of formal background. You don't have to do this full time like I do. There's so many people I know who, just with little bits of time and no relevant background, nonetheless stand up, make a difference, make an impact. I think that's America. I think that's a very empowering message for families of all stripes to realize they can be part of the solution too.
Well, and it's consistent with a theme that you've talked about before. Change doesn't happen in Washington. Change happens at the kitchen table. And it requires Americans to stand up in a world that sits down.
Yeah.
I'm using your words.
Yep.
And get active. And a theme on this show has been that you can be most effective at the most local level. We all want to make massive national change, but if you go there first, that's a mistake. You sort of have to work bottom up. Very small example in my life. I've been on a number of boards and try to stand up in a world that sits down, but I got on the board of my children's school. Wonderful school, wonderful leadership. Can't say a bad thing about the school, but we didn't have school security. We didn't have armed security on the campus. That was a hill that I was willing to die on. And we implemented changes in the school where we now have armed security on that board, but it wouldn't have happened, not because of me, but because of a number of parents sort of getting together collectively and saying, this is something that we want for the school that we send our children to. And we sort of looked at it from all different angles. We looked at different solutions, and we figured out the most appropriate way to implement that. And it's gone beautifully for the last 3 years. And so that was me scrolling through my phone in bed, getting mad at headlines and saying, well, how the hell do I do something about this? So what's your advice to the mom or dad scrolling through their phone saying, man, I'm pissed. What do I do?
We all have those moments when we're doom scrolling. I want to briefly say, Gates, what I find interesting about your experience you just shared, you said, here's what I did. I stood up, I spoke out about this issue, but you made mention of the fact that it wasn't just you. There were other people who agreed with you. And what I find is that when you stand up, you're basically almost empowering or giving permission even for others to do it too. So many people want to speak out, want to get engaged, but either maybe they're a little shy, they don't know how, right? And seeing someone else stand up and plant a flag in the ground and say, this is what I stand for, this is what I want to do, that rallies people to you. And it's almost like this magnetic force that draws people in. And so, look, I think, the body of Christ is an example. We all have different members and different things that we're doing. I think we can have our flag planters as well. We can have our people who are attracted to that, who can provide financial support, logistical support, whatever, right? Everyone can contribute in different ways. So I'm not going to sit here and answer your question and say, here is the formula that everyone should follow. It's very unique. What I will say is that it's easier than you think, especially in our day. I'll give a very simple little example. There's a great book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's all about how to use he calls it the psychology of persuasion. How do you get other people to do what you want? There's lots of interesting stuff in the book, but one of the big ones he talks about is the rule of reciprocity. We were talking about this earlier with value creation. If I do something for you, you're going to feel indebted in a way, and we're going to want to work together and support one another. So in the book, he gives some strategies about how to do this. Let's apply it to your question. How do you get involved? Imagine someone running for city council. What do they need? They need financial support, sure, so you can donate. They need someone to walk and put door hangers on. They need someone to show up to their town hall and set up chairs, right? If you just show up and do any one of these things and contribute to that individual, you've now built a relationship, or the start of a relationship, which over time is going to put you in a position of influence to be able to, hey, let's talk about getting this law passed or whatever, right? This is why lobbyists are so effective at what they do. They know how this game works. Frankly, all it really boils down to is, think of an ATM. Before you can make a withdrawal, you have to make a deposit. And most people don't think that way. They think, oh, I'm going to email my legislator and tell them to vote against this bill. Like, okay, great, but what deposits have you made in that relationship? So what I usually tell people is, start super simple. Follow them on social media, and whoever it is, whoever the influential people in your community are, right? Follow them on social media, subscribe to their newsletter, engage with their content. You want to go even beyond that and not be part of the faceless crowd? Set up a town hall, a cottage meeting in your home or in a little community center, and invite 50 people and refreshments, and just let that person come talk. They love talking. they have big egos, right? But now you're seen as, oh, he's a community organizer. Oh, he knows people. Oh, and they start to think of you a little bit differently, right? Find ways to contribute. How can I help you? What do you need? Oh, I know a person. Let me be a connector. You need a graphic designer? I've got a perfect one, right? It doesn't take much. Just get a little bit involved, dip your toe in the water. And like we shared with the Tuttle Twins books and the kids markets and all these projects that have become massive, they all started super small. It was just opportunity and response. And that can be very, very simple. And so what I encourage families to do is, don't think of the big long-term outcome. Don't think of the federal whatever. Don't think of the big campaign. Just think, who do I know or who do I want to build influence with? And just start very small and let that snowball start to go from there in organic ways that you can't predict, I can't foresee. It all starts small, it all starts local, but frankly, it all starts with relationships. Just think in the relationship context. How can I make a deposit in the relationship with Gates? How can I create value for you without any thought towards, the thing with the rule of reciprocity is, you don't want it to be like, therefore now it's your turn, you need to do something for me. It's just like, let me go create value for other people. And I know that wonderful things are going to happen to me because I'm making all these deposits in relationships that I can't foresee how that's going to unfold in the future. But beautiful things can happen when you do that. I've seen it in my own life, and that would be my message to families, is just get started. Think about how you can make deposits in relationships with other people of influence so that down the line that can turn into transformative opportunities.
And if you create the right value for someone, if you make the appropriate deposit, you won't have to ask for anything in return. If you do it the right way and create enough value, they'll feel indebted to you to create value back. I've talked on this show about my sort of approach to marriage. Align vision, align values, complementary capabilities.
Yeah.
And it's very similar. You got to be fighting the same fight, but you got to be coming at it from different angles. If you and I are good at the same thing, we're not going to add much value as two people as we could as one. And you got to find people that complement your skill set. It's a collective effort. People often think they don't get off the couch because they think they have to do all the heavy lifting themselves, and that's not true.
I think that marriage is actually a great example. You don't go around proposing marriage on the first date. It takes time. You have to build up to that. You have to make those deposits in the relationship to say, I'm interested in you. I care about you. I value you. Let me show that to you in 1,000 different ways. And so often we compare ourselves to the end product of other, like people look at me, oh my gosh, you've written 50 books now. Oh my gosh, I could never. It started with one. It started with me in a room just tinkering, right? You can't compare yourself to the end result. You have to think, okay, a lot of little deposits are made and a lot of incremental progress is made along the way. Let's just think about how I get started. Let's break it down. And not only is that a message for adults, it's a message for the kids too. Mm-hmm. It's like the world can be daunting and big. Don't compare yourself to other people. Just think about what's my next move? Yeah. What can I do?
I want to get into the role that faith plays in your approach to all this, but I want to just ask one more question in the theme of what we're talking about. You know, if somebody met you today, they would. If I met you today, I would think you have some super decorated legal background or something like that, or you had been a writer on a TV series before this, but you were a web developer. You mentioned that yourself. What was the moment where something in you changed and said, I'm dedicating the rest of my life, or at this time of my life, a portion of my life, to what you're doing now?
I was newly married to my wife. We were watching TV and the news, and there was this raid that was being shown on the news of the FLDS compound in Texas. This is the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the polygamist, Warren Jeffs, skeezy dude, awful things happening. But not having a legal background, as you point out, I nonetheless was studying a little bit about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and so forth. And when I saw that happen, what they did is they removed 400 kids from the compound. And look, I knew very little of what was happening other than what was on the news, but I thought that was a problem. Taking all these kids from their moms without due process, right? I felt it was like a legal kidnapping. And so I, with my web developer marketer background, I thought, you know, what can I do? I started an online petition, release the kids back to their moms, don't put them in the foster care system, which is full of drug abuse and sex abuse and other problems. The petition took off. I got interviewed by the local news outlet where I live, first time I'd ever been on TV. And but the petition and my blog got flooded with comments of people expressing gratitude. A lot of them distant family members of these families that were involved. All of them saying, yeah, you know, this Warren Jeffs guy is a problem. Yeah, there are issues. But the way that the government responded with all the, you know, tanks and guns and everything else was wrong. Thank you for standing up for us. Look, did I accomplish anything significant with the petition? No, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any deposits with politicians or anything that I could leverage and try and, you know, call in a favor or get anything done. But I stood up and I spoke out for a community that is in the shadows, and they all felt, and they would say this in the comments on the blog, like, no one speaks up for us. No, everyone tries to ignore us and push us to the fringe. And the outcome of that for me was realizing I have a certain set of skills, and I have, maybe I'll call it a thick skin, where I don't really care about public opinion. I just want to do what's right and take the arrows as they come. And I got a little bit of a dopamine hit that day of like, hey, you did a good thing. You know, did it accomplish anything world changing? No. Kids ended up getting released back to their moms, and I got some letters from congressmen and stuff in response to the petition. Big whoop. But I realized that I have a certain set of skills that, if applied towards useful purposes, I can accomplish a lot of good. That became basically the seed that was planted that led to Libertas, where our think tank, Libertas Institute, ever since in 2011 when I founded it, has been focused on who are the people who need to stand up for themselves, who are the people that don't have resources, who are the people that are basically getting screwed by their own government, and they don't have political connections, they don't have legal support, they don't have financial resources. And so time and again, whether it's like food trucks getting hosed by local ordinances that favor the brick and mortar restaurants over the food trucks, right? Or the single mom, or we had a homeschool kid that was depressed and ordered by the judge to go back to government school where she was being bullied based on some truancy law. So we stood up for that family and got that fixed. Over and over and over again, we found opportunities to stand up for, I'll call them the oppressed, and people that without our help would not have had relief. And I'll tell you, I sleep very well at night knowing that I've been able to have the good fortune to be in that position, to be, frankly, an instrument in God's hands to serve other people, recognizing that, but not for me and my team, they would not have had the outcome that they did. And that's something I want for everybody. You don't have to start a think tank. You don't have to do this full time. Just standing up in a sit-down world, just doing something for someone else, you get your dopamine hit, you feel good about yourself, but you accomplish a lot of good in the world, and that's more important.
So you mentioned God. Perfect transition to where I want to go next. On this show, we talk about faith, family, and freedom. We've talked a ton about freedom. We've talked about family. Let's talk about faith. For me, my faith informs everything I do. I pray before these shows. I pray after these shows. And in other ways in my life. And it doesn't have to be an overtly faithful episode or even a faithful task that I'm doing in my life, but that's sort of the compass through which I operate. That's my North Star, and it's the mental model through which I filter my world. Now, I don't always execute on that at a level that I wish I did, but it's at least what informs the decision making I make in my life. I used to call myself a social conservative, and then I converted to Catholicism 8 years ago, and now I call myself a moral conservative because I think these are moral issues that we deal with in our day-to-day lives, whether it's faith-based, business-based, political, whatever. I know you're a man of faith. Tuttle Twins and Libertas aren't overtly faithful, but I know that your faith informs your fight for liberty. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, what you said I resonate a lot with. My faith, I would say, infuses my life to the point where I try and use it as a filtering mechanism for decisions I make in a wide variety of contexts. What I'm often critical of in, say, broaden Christendom is people who, say only go to church on, Easter and Christmas, or if they go every Sunday, that's amazing, but then that's where they leave it. And then Monday through Saturday, they just go live a normal secular-ish kind of life, but they're not allowing their faith to be, really infused in what they do. I think Jesus's teachings apply as much to our political decisions about what I should vote for, and am I going to increase this tax on that, grandma on a fixed income because I want a soccer park for my kids, right? As much as it is in an economic context about, my own charitable decisions or how we handle charity as a society, right? I call myself often more of a voluntarist. I think that all human relationships should be based on voluntary interaction rather than coercive, forced ones. And I think that's very consistent with the teachings of Christ, that there is good to be done in the world, there is evil to be responded to, but we have to use persuasion and long-suffering and meekness, and there are ways to go about this. To me, it's a very empowering thing as I think about my own faith, that it gives me, I like what you say as a moral conservative, right? Having that moral framework, to me, it makes it easier to evaluate decisions. I remember as a kid, right, your parents would say no to drugs, or if you're ever offered, to drink beer at a party or whatever, say no. And the lesson they gave me was, don't make the decision in the moment, make the decision now. And I think about that with my faith. If I'm very committed to my faith and I want to be a disciple of Christ, it makes it much easier for me to analyze, should I help this person, or should I take this action, or should I donate to this cause, or whatever. Those decisions throughout my life have all become easier because of earlier commitments that I made. I see a lot of people just flittering through life, and it's very reactive, like, what am I going to do here, or should I do that, or whatever. And I feel, there's always in anyone's life ups and downs, but I feel like mine are much chiller in a sense, because I don't feel like I have to decide in the moment what I'm going to do. I kind of know what you said, North Star, right? I know what my North Star is. I know what I'm trying to do. I love that. I want that for everyone. I think having that compass in life makes the navigation a lot easier.
making decisions before the moment arrives. I sort of grab a nugget or two from every episode, and that's one that I'm going to hold on to here. It's nothing I've never heard before, but sometimes you need to be reminded of that. And you talk about people that go to church, on Christmas and Easter, maybe even every Sunday. I used to go to church for me. I used to go to hear the sermon, to hear the homily, to get something out of it. Mm-hmm. And I learned through my Catholic conversion that you don't go to church for yourself. You go to church for God. Mm-hmm. That is your time to go honor and worship God, and you practice your faith the rest of the time. Yeah. That's 1 hour of your life a week that you're giving to God. That's not for you, that's for Him. So it's just another way of saying that once you step out of the church, you carry all those principles for the next 7 days of the week. You don't just show up for 1 hour a week.
Yeah, I love it.
Faith-based principles. I'm going to ask you a question and answer it because I want you to talk about something. The question is, what is one faith-based principle that sort of guides your work? And you introduced me to the story of the slothful servant. Mm-hmm. I'd like you to talk about that.
So my particular faith, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a huge mouthful. That's Mormons. We're better known as Mormons. And for those who don't know, Mormons believe in the Bible, right? We have our different takes on different doctrines, of course, but we believe that God has continued to speak to prophets and therefore have additional scripture. And in one of those scriptures, there's a commandment that says we need to be anxiously engaged in a good cause and bring to pass much righteousness of our own accord, and that those who don't are considered slothful servants waiting to be commanded in all things. Now, the Bible has echoes of this. Jesus has said this in other contexts. But what I like about that for me is that I feel like there's a lot of horrible things going on in the world, and I feel like a lot of people are disengaged and disempowered. And like we were saying earlier, if someone were to stand up and plant a flag and magnetically rally more people to the cause, we would be able to combat those evils much more successfully and frequently. I feel, as an individual, obligated to stand up in a sit-down world, to be anxiously engaged, to not be that slothful servant waiting to be told. I think of the parable of the 10 virgins, right? The foolish ones had not sufficiently spiritually prepared to be ready for the bridegroom, whereas the wise virgins who were invited into the wedding feast had done the work. They had been prepared. They had the kind of spiritual preparation that was the oil in their lamps. And so I wonder, right, again, are you going to church on Sunday? Great. What are you doing Monday through Saturday to build that preparation, to do the work, to show God that we're loving Him by loving other people? And I think loving other people requires teaching them truth, introducing them to true principles, empowering them with tools and solutions that can better their life. I see everything. I think God sees everything as spiritual, that what we see as temporal, right, finance or political systems or whatever, civic issues. I think to God everything has this like spiritual undertone, and therefore how we interact as a society through our civic processes or through our economic markets is just a different expression of the same principles. We have to have the same core spiritual values underlying all of that. And so that to me is what it all boils down to. We shouldn't be slothful servants. God wants us to be engaged. He wants us to use our agency to better other people's lives. When He says to love other people, that isn't this just having this passive emotion, right? Love is a verb. We have to proactively go out and do things to benefit other people's lives. That I think is the mission God wants us on. I'll speak for me. It's the mission He wants me on.
Last question before we tell our listeners where they can engage with all your great work. So Tuttle Twins isn't, overtly religious, but I want to ask you if you could write a Tuttle Twins book that was overtly religious, but it taught one spiritual truth to children, what would it be?
I'm going to answer your question different than you expected. When you and I spoke,
that's a way of you telling me it was a terrible question.
No,
but go ahead, Connor.
It's a way of me remembering that I didn't fully answer your question on our prep call the way that I ought to have, but it is the answer to your question. I told you on our call that while the Tuttle Twins books are not overtly religious, for example, one of them says our rights come from God and so forth, right? And that was it. The answer to your question is what I failed to mention on the call, and that is we have a book about the Golden Rule, the Tuttle Twins and the Golden Rule. What I love about the Golden Rule is all the major religions have a version of the golden rule. Jesus, of course, taught it in the Sermon on the Mount. What you want other people to do to you, do unto them. What I like about Jesus's version compared to some of the other religions, in the other religions, it's in a negative context. It says, don't do to other people the things that you don't want them doing to you, right? You don't want to be murdered, don't murder other people, right? Basic.
Still a good rule,
Still a good rule. But there's so much more flipping it to the positive. The good things that you want other people to do to you, you should be doing to them. And that's how Jesus kind of flipped it on its head. Before, all in the old world and all the religions stemming from that, it was all this negative connotation, not negative in a bad sense, but negative in don't do bad things, as opposed to proactively do good things. And so I think that's an overtly religious message as a Christian, and we don't present it that way, but it's such a fundamental rule. What did Jesus say? He says, love God and love other people, and upon these two laws hang all the laws and the prophets, which is basically all of the Old Testament. He's saying this is what it's all about. It all boils down to loving God and loving other people, all encapsulated in the golden rule. And so what I love about the Tuttle Twins, as you say, it's not overt, it's not Bible bashing over someone's head, but these principles that I think are from God and these truths are infused throughout all of these political and economic things. I think the free market is an expression of truth, of godly truth, right? And I think, property rights and ownership, being a steward over property. I frankly don't think I'm a property owner. I think God owns everything. I think I'm a steward over property. These truths can be taught in a way that we're doing, where they're appealing to agnostics and atheists and people of other religions. Those truths can permeate out. If they're disconnected from an overtly religious context, we find that those truths can be taught much more widely to people, each of whom, like the Christians, are going to be like, I see what you're doing there, right? And they'll kind of get it. But these truths can filter into the lives of other people who otherwise would maybe throw up a wall and resist. But we can say, look, these are, I think, common sense truths that are at the core of our human experience. I look at that from a Christian perspective. You may look at that from a different perspective. That's fine, but we can at least agree that these truths exist and operate that way.
There's so many people that don't know the golden rule comes from the Bible. They know the golden rule. They don't know sort of the origin story behind it. And so there's subtle ways to do these things to bring Christ into our lives and our children's lives. All right, Connor, I see sort of two ways to support you. You can write a check to Libertas and support sort of the greater network, or you can buy a Tuttle Twins book or watch the show. How can people support you? Where can they find the books and all that? Yeah,
so libertas.org is where to find our network and all the stuff that we're doing. So you or anyone want to donate, great, that's where to go. TuttleTwins.com is where to find all the books. We have books for all ages, so no matter the age of your kids, your grandkids, you want to donate to libraries, that's a big thing a lot of people like doing. So TuttleTwins.com. The cartoon is at TuttleTwins.tv. Or you just look up Angel Studios on your app. And then, if you got kids, grandkids, anyone watching at home, get them involved in the Children's Entrepreneur Market. That one is a mouthful, children'sentrepreneurmarket.com. Or you can just go to libertas.org and click the button, and that'll be a little bit easier. But yeah, get your kids involved. We're trying to grow this thing and just having a blast doing it.
Well, Connor, thanks for coming on. You're a great example of We the People. You're a great example of someone that is standing up in a sit-down world, but we're very happy that you chose to sit down with us today. Thanks for coming on.
I'll stand up here shortly. Thanks, Gates.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? And we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. We the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.